Hey everybody, how's it going? So today I'm going to be working on an iPhone 14 that was sent here for a connector repair. This is supposed to be a repair-friendly phone from Apple. However, I look at this as to be somewhat of a trap. So having a look at this thing under the microscope, you can see that we've got this whole Samsung thing going on, you know, where the connector is just like falling apart. I haven't seen too many of these yet, so I really can't tell you just how common this is going to be, but we're going to dig in and replace this today. So I'm going to set my hot air on 340 degrees C and get some flux on this situation. I'm going to do my best to remove this thing with a really low temperature, well, not really low, but a somewhat low melting alloy. We don't want to disturb the sandwich balls. However, I'm pretty sure they've used something that melts at a really high temperature, so I think we're going to be able to do this pretty easy. So I'm going to start with some standard 180 degree alloy here, the same stuff that's used for like the iPhone 10 motherboards and whatnot. And let's just go ahead and see if I can make this happen, shall we? So starting up here at the ground joints first, and man, oh man, do I hope that we don't actually, or I don't actually accidentally float the board sandwich. If I do, I'll have to redo that too, but here we go. So right now I'm focusing on warming the board up and getting this alloy smeared all over here. I am kind of glad to see that half of the connector is already broken loose, so you know that's going to make things a little easier. Now I've got it at this weird funky angle because of there's a metal bracket right up here that's going to prevent me from coming in with my right hand if I put this connector horizontally. So I'm starting at a really weird funky angle. It's always nice when they break the connector all the way off the board. That way we don't have to actually worry about taking it off. It's already halfway done for us, right? All right, let's just keep moving along here. I've done a lot of work on the 14 Pro and the Pro Max, but I haven't actually worked on the 14 yet. And when I opened the cover on this thing, it was like almost complete total shock. I can't believe you can take the screen off of this thing and disconnect and replace the screen, but if you want to disconnect the battery, you got to take the whole other side of the housing off. Like, how many technicians are going to disconnect the battery on this? Incoming trap. I haven't checked to see if any of these pins stay live while the phone's powered off, but if it's anything like many of the rest of the models, this thing is very much live, even if the power's off. So I don't know. I think this is this is a repair friendly, not so repair friendly phone. Maybe another middle finger from Apple in terms of repair. You know, this is the point in time where you really just wouldn't want your customer to walk in and see what their phone looks like. I mean, come on, this looks good, right? So we're just going to keep removing this connector. It's okay, everything's going to be just fine. You all seen me carve all the glue off the board in my last video. This ought to be pretty easy on your stomach. All right, so we'll just casually remove this connector, nice and pretty. Absolutely beautiful. It's marvelous. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add some more flux to this just to make it a little bit more pretty. There we go. And as I do that, I'm going to continue to warm the board up. Not too far up, because if I float the sandwich, then life is going to be miserable for a little while. Oh yeah, come to Papa. Come to Butthead. Okay, almost there. Sorry, I'm a little bit of a 80s, 90s child. Sometimes I can't help myself. There we go. We want to try real hard to keep all these little pins off of the rest of the board, because something tells me the other connectors wouldn't appreciate having this stuff smashed inside of them. All right, getting a little closer. All right, I'm getting ready to switch irons and do some wicking here. But I don't want to let the board cool off, so I'm going to have to be really swift with it. I actually should have already got my wick prepared. I got another roll of wick. I thought I had another roll of wick. I'm going to use the rest of what I got here, though. Just throw that aside. I'm going to grab a larger iron and wick this off of here. A little bit of a jitter there. Don't want that now, do we? There's one side. The other side. Whoops. So the best thing to do when something really bad happens is to remain calm and just fix it. It looks like that's a capacitor, and we're not going to want to send this back out of here without it, so I'm going to go ahead and get this put back on here. It's going to sit just like that. There we go. Now we can get back to the job. Yikes. Okay, I would like to do a little bit more wicking on that before I put some new alloy on here. I really want to leave as little low melt on here as possible. And I could flood it, just flood the whole thing with leaded, but that starts to make the wicking more difficult, and this is going to be just fine. I do know that you can't very well just put these connectors on with low melt. That will make for a very brittle solder joint, which could be why Apple has started using a higher temperature alloy between the board sandwiches and not the same low melt that they were using. So let's add a little bit more flux to it and start getting some solder on these pads. Now, I am not planning on hand soldering this because of the close proximity to everything around it. I'm planning on getting us some nice bubbled up pads here, and then I'm going to float this sucker on here with hot air. I'm going to try to do the top ones first so that I can switch directions. Now this will actually be my first connector on iPhone 14. I've done a lot on the 14 Pro and Pro Max, but like I said, this is my first 14. So let's just see if we can. That's not enough solder. We need to like we need to get it to dip. There we go. The pads with less thermal mass are going to be a little harder for me to do this with. It's actually too much flux on this board. It's making these little bloblets too pretty. Let's try to wipe some of this flux off of here. Go with some alcohol and a Q-tip. Very gently, because the Q-tip will catch on the little blips that I have on here. And then we'll have damaged pads to deal with. So then, let's try this again. Now I may use just a smidgen of flux instead of drowning it in flux, because I'm just trying to get it to, make a little like, I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, that shape right there on top of these pads. There we go, there we go. Some more solder. Much better. Should have just removed the flux to start with. Gee whiz. Looking good there. Now right here we are not at all by any means trying to make this pretty. We're just trying to get an even amount of solder all over the place. Or not even, but just enough solder. Now that one's ground, so it's going to want to just like be all ugly. That's okay, we'll leave it. Moving on. It's just marvelous. I love it when they do that. Okay, so that is pretty much all the solder that we need on these. I'm going to go ahead and come back and add a little bit to these. A couple of those I can get to from the outside real easy by hand. I am concerned about having too much on one or two of these ground pins. We're just going to leave that alone. All right, so we've got an okay amount of solder out at the ends, and we've got an okay amount of solder across all the pads. We're going to ignore all the fuzz for now. Now what I'm going to do is make all this look somewhat prettier. Actually, before I do that, let me get the new connector ready. These connectors say they are for the iPhone 14 and a 14 Plus. So this looks like a brand spanking new connector that I just dropped. All right, so I'm going to get that ready. It's going to sit on the board just like that. So I'll set that aside here for just a second. All right, now let's make all these pads uniform so I can sit a connector on top of it. And also it is important to get this fuzz out of the way. It's not really important, it's just annoying. Okie dokie, let's start warming this up and get this thing ready to receive a brand spanking new connector. Trying to warm the whole entire board up somewhat, but the alloy I have on here should melt before everything else, so we should be in good shape. There we go. We see these things starting to form little bloblets. There we go. We must be missing a little flux here on the right because it didn't form bloblets. Actually, no, it's going to be the added thermal mass of my board here, or my board holder. Okay, there we go. Now with all that in place, I can just take and sit us a connector on top of here. Without the hair, and without accidentally flipping it over. I am going to go ahead and switch over to the large nozzle and slow down my airflow a little bit, because this will be really annoying if I try doing this with a higher airflow. It's not so bad on connectors that have metal end caps where I can really firmly hold them in place, but this thing's surrounded in plastic, which means I'm not going to be able to hold it with my tweezers as much, or the tweezers will just go right through it. So I'm slowing my air down a bit. I'm at airflow of 15. I'll warm the board up right to the point where it is almost melting. I'm going to add some flux to it to prevent this thing from jumping out of the way repeatedly over and over and over. We can clean that off later. There we go. Almost there. Okay, we're going to stop right there. I may now go ahead and change my airflow back to the normal airflow. And I'm going to give this thing one more little float because I don't feel really good about these bottom solder joints. But now that we're locked in, it's not going to blow away on me. Okay, here we go. Okay, much better. All right, we're going to stop right there and let this thing cool off. Now, as it cools, I'm going to start cleaning it up with some alcohol, because the flux cleans off much easier whenever it's hot. So it's not going to be absolutely factory perfect, but it's going to be pretty close. I'm just going to clean this up really good and then slap this back in the housing and see if it will boot with image. And you can see this sticker here didn't like my hot air too much. Might consider removing that in the future, but thankfully on the iPhone 14 that's actually obscured by the mid-frame housing thing that they have covering up all the guts. It's almost like they tried to make this model really easy for screen repairs, but if this connector is still powered, there are so many shops that, I mean, they're not going to take it the rest of the way apart. Who's going to remove the back glass just to do a screen replacement? And on this model, you have to remove the back glass if you're going to disconnect the battery. Like, it's a trap. Like, it's a trap. Don't do it. It's a trap. So here's what our sandwich joints look like, and you can see that we haven't disrupted or floated anything there. That's all good and fine. Now, there you have it, folks. We have a... It didn't go down on that end. Is there something under it? Yeah, I left a little piece of... Oh, that's embarrassing. No, I've got to float this one more time. Normally, whenever I'm doing these connectors, after I get the nice domes on there, I clean it off with alcohol and I give it one more inspection, but on this one, I just got ahead of myself. I'm maintaining cameras and whatnot. This did not float all the way down on there because I left a little piece of stuff under there. All right, so let's strap that back in the board holder. Now let's see if this thing will float down on here straight now. So I'm going to add just a little bit of flux again because I've got to float this whole thing. It's rather annoying. Start warming the board up. Yeah, it is really important once the, right before you put the connector on here to make absolutely sure this thing's clean. And I missed that little black speck. All right, let's clean this up again and see how it looks now, shall we? All right, so I've got this all cleaned up, and it's not absolutely perfect, but it will survive future screen replacements. Let me just show you what it looks like. Here's the spot where I had messed up and had it up too high because of a piece of debris under it. And if we look across the solder joints here, we've got nice even humps on everything. Well, not necessarily even, but it's actually very large and strong. And then on the other side of this connector, it's a little bit more symmetrical, and we've got plenty of solder, plenty of bonding to the pads, and we have actually got plenty of bonding to the ground pads on the ends. Well, actually one end's ground, the other end is not. I assume the other end, it's probably live all the time just to get, to have a nice short whenever the connector's plugged on there backwards. So I'm gonna pick a couple of pieces of fuzz off of here and clean this up a little bit farther than it actually has to be. We're not going for visibly perfect, although this one is somewhat close. My main concern, since this is a newer phone, I want it to be able to survive future screen replacements because it's most likely going to go through that. So that is the connector on this board replaced. I'm going to get this thing slapped back in the housing and see if it works. I'll be right back. So I've got this thing all reassembled into the housing and everything looks pretty good. And I'm getting ready to find out if that display connector has live battery voltage when the battery's hooked up. So I'm just going to go ahead and reconnect the battery. And then I'm going to flip this thing over and I'm going to check it with a multimeter. One end of this new display connector is ground and the other end is not. I've got a board view, but I don't, I'm not sure what's going on. So let's see if this thing is booby trapped, shall we? I'm going to put my black probe on ground. And I'm going to check to see if either end of this connector has voltage. All right, that end does not. And that end does not. So maybe, just maybe, the display connector does not have any power to it whenever the phone is turned off. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let's connect a charger and see what we get. Right off the bat, we are drawing 300 milliamps, 400 milliamps. We have battery icon. Yes, this thing is going to be good to go. Instead of sitting here waiting for it to charge the battery, I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this to the point it was whenever it came in and get this thing ready to send back to the shop that sent it here. All right, so there you go. I have this thing reassembled back up to the point where it was whenever it first came in here. We have working image and we have a good connector, and this will be a happy customer. And that is going to be the end of this video. I do thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like my video, please give me a thumbs up. If you like this type of thing and you want to see more of it, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day. Now wait a minute, I actually have the passcode for this one, and I would like to do a little bit more testing. And also, this customer was really concerned that the phone was disabled, and I'm happy to say it is not disabled and all of the data is still intact. They knew that the digitizer was working, but they were worried that it was disabled. I would only like to see if we have working baseband. We do. And then I'm going to check and see that we have working Wi-Fi. We do. And yeah, this phone's going to be good to go. Thanks for watching. I wonder, this thing has aftermarket back glass, aftermarket front glass. Do we have working Face ID? Face ID is going to work. Cool. We're just going to stop right there.